Okay, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us on Harper Podcast, Radhika. We're so delighted to have you here to talk, a little bit about your journey with this incredible book, which is blurring on my screen, but you can see it, Fire on the Ganges, Life Among the Dead in Banaras. It's your debut book. A lot has gone into this. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. And we've been interacting on social media ever since I read this book. I took it with me on a flight. And as I was telling you then also, it stayed in my sort of dreamscape for days. It's a very vivid, searing, beautiful portrayal. But let me start by asking, what really led you to write this book and a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, so it started as a student experience. To be honest, I was doing my master's in journalism at Columbia University, and we were expected to work on a thesis project. And I had, at that time, a couple of ideas that I wanted to work with, but nothing was really um, like I didn't feel too connected to those ideas, and something just didn't feel right. So, and I was still researching and reading a lot, and I in the 11th hour actually of submitting the idea to my guide and mentor, I read about the dome community, and I got really fascinated by reading that article, because honestly I had no idea about the existence of a community that specialized in cremating the dead. And I was completely uninformed, and I wanted to know more about them. And also, I was very interested in understanding why mainstream media had not covered them. And of course, there was academic literature available, but that was also very limited. And also, it just focused on the dome's work at the at the cremation ground. So it didn't go into like informed, detailed reportage about their lives. And I wanted to know about the women. I wanted to know about the men, like how working at the cremation ground impacts them psychologically, physically. I wanted to know about women. Why were they not present in public spaces, and did they have any kind of autonomy? Um, uh, like, what were their desires? What were their dreams? What did they think about their future? And I wanted to understand even the children, because um, whoever, later on, of course, when I went and interviewed them, none of them wanted to grow up to be corpse burners. They all told me that they wanted to either become a doctor or an engineer, or a police, join the police in some way or the other. So those were the kind of questions, really, before I went to Manikarnika Ghat. Those are the questions that were really that I was engaging with, and that's what led me to go forth and start reporting on the community.
And it's a really fascinating series of stories that you weave together, because you do follow certain characters. You tell us a little bit about what happens to them at the end of the book, but let me ask you a little bit more about what you learned. For example, we were just chatting about how you describe the sort of experience of the children, for example, that really does stay with the reader. And what you just said is bang on. I never had read about this community before. I don't think it's ever really been extensively reported on in the mainstream. Can you tell us a little bit more about the children, that experience, and what stayed with you? This took you several years, I believe, right? Was it 7 to 8
Yeah, eight
years?
years. 8 years. Yes.
8 years. That is a
Yeah.
labor of love as well, Radhika, if anything is. So, what are some of the things that stayed with you?
So just talking about the children to begin with. The thing is that many of them, boys but in particular, when they're around the age of 5 or 6 years old, they are pushed out of their homes, and by their parents, and expected to go and work at the cremation ground. And it's not because the parents want their children to work. It's just because of crippling poverty, that they sort of send their children off to work at the cremation ground. And what the children do when they're 5 to 6 years old, the boys specifically, because the girls don't work at the cremation ground, is that they pick up something called a shroud, like coffins, basically. And they're these these fabrics that are draped on corpses when they are delivered to Manikarnika Ghat and Harishchandra Ghat, which is another cremation ground in Banaras. And they come in different colors of yellow and golden and red. And so these shrouds is something that these children pick up, the abandoned shrouds from the Manikarnika Ghat, and they resell it to 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 shops, where the shop owners then wash it and iron it and put it in plastic bags and sort of resell them to mourning customers at a higher price. But the children earn very little from what they do, and it's a very like I would say it's very unrewarding kind of work. And they of course get bullied around because they're very young over there, so they get bullied around by other grown-up laborers who are working at the cremation ground. The children sometimes burn their hands and feet because they're working so close to the burning pyres. And yeah, because the work is so demanding, and in order to meet those work pressures, to cope with those work pressures and fatigue and hunger and stress and peer pressure, they unfortunately find some sort of relief in consuming drugs. And so they start consuming drugs and drinking alcohol at a very young age, um, just to cope with their circumstances. So it's a very trying and very, I mean, nobody would want to have a childhood like that. And unfortunately, because of where they are born, um, and because of the caste system, they are expected to work there. And then they, of course, when they grow up, when they're like 11 or 12 years old, they start working with pyres and cremating corpses. So yeah.
It's, I think, as you're talking about it, as you read about this in the book, the age, it's just shocking, right? Because you're talking about 5 to 6 year olds, you're talking about 11 year olds who are kind of the older, like they know their way around. There's a little bit of a bullying dynamic that happens. There's a little bit of a protective dynamic. There's substance abuse, and when you think about the fact that this is the best opportunity they have to make a few extra rupees for the household, often sometimes for themselves, but usually the household, like you said, that they can bring supplies home, it's quite it's quite horrific. And I don't think that a lot of people who for obviously for the Hindu community, going to Banaras to get the last rites done for a loved one is one of the rites of passage. And I just feel that it's such a counter to what we know from that side of things, what you're sharing with us. I wonder, for you, Radhika, how was it to be there documenting this? You have the kids coming and telling you these pretty heartbreaking, stories as well. And you've done such justice to their stories. But what was maybe the most challenging thing for you while you were reporting this or writing about this?
I mean, there were many challenges, but since we're talking about the children, and for me to getting to know everyone in the community and breaking that ice, I think that was a huge challenge. But more importantly, I think it was just over a period of time, once you get to know them in person, and about their lives and their challenges, like you see them how they're existing on a day-to-day basis. um I mean, it starts breaking your heart, because that they don't have, the children don't have those kind of opportunities that that m- many other people from privileged backgrounds do. And they have so many dreams and aspirations, to be honest. And just like, if I want to share an incident where, when I was reporting, there was some of the boys used to accompany me to Manikarnika Ghat from their neighborhood, and we would be walking, and they would try to avoid one particular route, and so they would always say, Didi, let's not go from this route, let's take the longer route. And I would always wonder why that was the case. But I soon learn that there was and there continues to be a temple on that specific route that the children avoid, and the temple's priest actually, every time he sees the children from the dome community anywhere near the temple, he shoos them away, he shouts at them, he calls them caste slurs. So I mean, it's just imagine, like, if you are so young and to have that kind of you know somebody just telling you to not be in the premises of, I mean, a temple. Like, it's, anyone should be able to come and do darshan to God, right? Like, but like, so that's the thing. So you would read one would read these terrible acts of violence in newspapers. You would read about lynchings and honor killings and whatnot, but then there are these smaller acts of violence that occur as well,
Yeah.
that impact the children psychologically, or impacts anyone who belongs to an oppressed caste, um, which is not documented that often. And so just getting to know about everyone's experiences, that was very, very I mean, it just affected me and impacted me at a much deeper level than I thought it would. So I've evolved, I think, also a lot over these years as a
I can
journalist.
imagine. I
Really.
think even because even as a reader, it stays with you. Like you evolve as a reader. I feel thanks to your work. So it must be like 10 times more for you documenting it over the years, getting to know these people. And I do want to say that. So the elephant in the room, of course, is caste privilege. There's privilege
Mhm.
that both of us share sitting here. Our surnames are testament to that. How much of that was important for you to address in conversation? How were you able to kind of gain access and trust? Maybe given that there's such huge disparities in the backgrounds, and of course then there is a caste privilege.
Yeah, so definitely there's caste privilege, um, and I do address that in the book as well. That, and I'm acutely aware of my privilege, to be honest. And so when I was writing this book, first and foremost, I went there as a reporter. So and that was my priority. So, and when I was writing the book, I wanted to ensure that my voice doesn't overshadow that of the domes, the individuals featured in the book. And so I was very careful and very sensitive in how I wrote. And but at the end of the day, like, I really feel that my job was to report, because many people are uninformed about the existence of this community, and I really felt it was important to document their lives, compile their stories, and put it out there, because um, like I said, people just don't, I don't know, like, I feel that the domes are quite invisible, um in for many people who belong to privileged backgrounds and castes. And so I thought that it was important to really report on the community. And I also feel like, if you're doing it from a place of empathy, and if you've done your research, if you've spent enough time building relationships with the members of the community, and are able to um, reach a place of trust and understanding,
Yeah.
and if you've done your if you've done your research, and you ask the right questions, then you're doing your job as a journalist. So, and sorry, what was your other question?
No, I think linked to this only. I feel like this how you were able to gain trust and gain access, and while acknowledging this, because of course you, as you just shared so eloquently, and you do write about it in the book. There's also a moment where you're having tea, sitting in someone's house, and that also stays with me, because for them that's such a radical departure from the kind of sort of microaggressions and aggressions they normally face. So that was also very beautiful, and it felt very unself-conscious on your part, but it felt like it also those are the things that help, right, in terms of gaining trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those, like you said, that those are the moments that really help build those bonds. And the thing is that they realized that I wasn't someone who would just come for a day or two, ask them questions, and just like vamoose, like I wouldn't disappear. um I worked very hard to build those relationships, and also because I was very interested in building those relationships. I wanted to know about their lives. I wanted to know how the women spend their days, like, what do they cook, or what dreams they have for their children. I wanted to know about the men, how it affected them psychologically working there. So, some of the men who I spoke to initially, they were very guarded, and understandably so, because, I'm an outsider, and um, I was, I am also a woman, and I was asking them questions, and they belong to a conservative community, so they're not very used to women approaching them and having these conversations with them. But so the men initially were very guarded, I would say, and over a period of time, because I kept returning to the neighborhood, and because I think they could see that I was genuinely interested um, in their lives, and I asked them questions, and I would spend time with them. And I'm not saying all this to like put like pat my back or something. Like, it's that's not the idea. It's just my process, like um how they also realized that I was there for the long haul, like, um and I would just sit with them and have conversations. Sometimes I would, initially too, I didn't even record them. And I would always be very respectful of their time. I would always ask them whether I can record or not. um so I think those were the things that really helped start conversations.
And I do want to ask you, building on that, is it one of those things? I mean, when you think about, you look back, like you said, it's relationships, it's real people, and we'll come to maybe their reactions a little bit later in the interview. But in this podcast, what were some of the most rewarding things? Because I mean, of course, you can look at all the challenging things, because it's not an easy what you've done, and now everyone can see the book. In this fantastic book is, as you said, 8 years. You were there for the long haul. You were there documenting families and what's been happening to them in this community. What were some of the rewarding moments for you?
Oh, I think just seeing the kids evolve and grow up, even seeing Dolly, and Bhola, all of them, just from where they began when I met them and where they are now, I think that was very rewarding. Seeing Lakshay and Komal, get married, I think that was just, it was so, because they experienced a lot of hardships and struggles in their relationship, because this was an intercaste relationship. So whatever Komal had gone through, whatever Lakshay had gone through, I think seeing all of that, and how they managed to still stay on, and I think that was quite rewarding to see. Um, and I think, if you talk about what was rewarding for me from a book's perspective, I think I never thought I'll finish writing this book, because I mean, even um, when it was 5 years down the line, I was like, I don't think I can finish this book, because it just seemed such a mammoth task. And also, you have to do them justice, right? Whoever you interview, they've spent time with you, they've given you their time, and they've trusted you with their lives. And so I just felt like such a responsibility
Yeah.
to tell their stories in the most genuine, sincere, um, and also relatable way, so that people can actually relate to them. I wanted to make sure that these individuals don't come across as like just two-dimensional people. Like, it's just there's more to their lives. Sorry, not like unidimensional people. Sorry, there's much more to them. um so just to be able to put something there where I finished the book, and there are so many readers who've approached me and said that they really connected with the individuals, and they were rooting for Lakshay and Komal. I mean, those things are really something that makes me feel that, okay, I've done my job. I think that
Yeah.
was the most validating thing and rewarding thing for me.
No, and as a reader, I really feel, because I feel like it's also so gentle, and you're like you said, you don't want you get the sense that your voice is not overpowering anyone else's. Like, you just come in very gently, very generously. But as a writer, I was reading this and being like, damn, that is some skill, because it's I don't I can't imagine doing that many interviews, having that much source material, and being able to weave
Yeah.
this tapestry. So I'm impressed. I'm in awe. I'm a little bit jealous, and I think that those are all good things. You're going to get from your fellow writers as well. I do want to ask, we've been talking about different characters, name dropping in a way, for those of you who've not read the book. So we're going to ask. So hopefully, by the end of this, you'll go out and get it. But let me ask, Radhika, do you want to do a short, like a paragraph about Bhola, you said, and then we can chat a little
Yeah.
bit more about it.
Sure. So just to give you an idea, that Bhola is this really ambitious young man. He's a go-getter. He doesn't let anything come in his way. And when we meet him in the book, he is the only individual from his community in Chandghat, which is their neighborhood, who has been able to leave Chandghat and leave Banaras and pursue higher education in another city, which is Ludhiana. So and what's interesting about Bhola is that when he is in Ludhiana, he hides his caste and his identity from his classmates. And it's not because he is embarrassed of who he is. It's just that anyone whomsoever he has told his truth to, um, they've always distanced themselves from him. So he was very careful in college, to not let people know that he is the son of a corpse burner. So this is a short passage that I'm going to read, that will probably give the listeners an idea of who Bhola is. So when Bhola is finally in Ludhiana, miles away from Banaras, he decides to be anyone but a dome. He will start afresh. It will be his second birth. It is in Ludhiana that he develops and finishes the art of storytelling, plucking himself out of his reality and planting himself in an invented narrative of his choosing. He uses his imagination to mold a past he never had. When his classmates ask about his family, Bhola says he has two brothers and one sister. In reality, he has four brothers and four sisters. They are 9 siblings in all. When his classmates ask what his eldest brother does for a living, Bhola says that Mohan owns a successful sari business in Banaras. In reality, his brother, like his father, his grandfather, his great grandfather, and the generations before them, tames glowing pyres under the bright silver moon and watches the ruby red flames swallow bones whole and spit out ash. Bhola says, to protect one lie, I have to follow it up with 50 others. I have to make up a lot of things, he says. At his university, his classmates inquire about his family, his surname, his roots. They ask if Chaudhrys are Yadavs. I say, yes. Whatever my classmates assume, I agree with them. I never correct them. So that's a short passage. Yeah.
There's so many worlds in that one one small reading. You do talk about Bhola, in your afterword as well. And what really stayed with me as part of this is that burning desire to get out. And I think when you're writing about some of these experiences, you can almost feel that claustrophobia. He does tell you, actually, like, living in that mahal, you can't do anything, you have to leave. I'm sure that that will resonate with a lot of people as well. Not necessarily just in that environment, but otherwise, it's a very brave thing he's done. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
what stays with me is also the courage, right? But the fact that he has to kind of weave all of these backstories and lies and all of that is it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Radhika, tell us a little bit about, how has he felt after the book has come out, or, once the book was done, what the reaction has been, him and some of the other people, that we get to meet in your book.
No, so Bhola has the book with him. He told me he'd started reading it, but I don't know where he's reached yet. But yeah, I've been in touch with everyone. In fact, I met them recently in February as well. They're all very happy that the book is out, and but the thing is that they're still continuing to lead their lives.
Yeah,
Bhola is the only one who's managed to get out of Chan Ghat, and make a life of his own. And but Shortcut is still there, and Lakshay, Dolly, they're all still where they are, unfortunately. But Bhola is also, I think, he's such an inspiring human being that every time he goes back to Chan Ghat, earlier there were families who didn't believe, like they didn't give education for the children a priority. For them, earning was a priority and still is. But now, because they've seen Bhola and what education has been able to do for him, like education has been his ticket out of
yeah,
um, wherever he was. And he's not working at Manikarnika Ghat, he's not a corpse burner, he's working in a very reputed firm, and he's getting a good pay package. So he's people have really, in that community, they've acknowledged how important education is and what it can do for a human being if they just persevere.
yeah.
So from that perspective, I think now, um, Dolly and everyone is really, really, um, they really want their children to go and study. So I think that has been a huge change, because I remember 8 years ago when I met the community members for the first time. They knew that education was important, but they just didn't give it that much of, what can we say, like they couldn't send their children also, like I said, because the children had to work. But now I think they want the children to be more focused on education as opposed to working at the cremation ground. So I think there's been a drastic change for sure.
And that's partly because of his journey, you're saying, because they've
Yeah,
seen that he can make this dramatic
yeah,
life, like transform his own life.
absolutely. Yeah, they've seen this world of change. Like Bhola is really, he's achieving a lot of things that for them, for many of them, they felt like it was completely impossible. So he is that kind of evidence that things
Yeah.
can be possible if you set your mind to it. So
That's incredible. I mean, that is inspiring, I think. Definitely the fact that, this can be heralding change for other people. I can imagine that when he goes back, though, I'm sure it sort of reinforces his decision to make a better life for himself. And I think the other thing you capture so well when you're talking right now is it's universal, isn't it? Every parent wants a better life for their children. So of course they would want their children to be able to follow this kind of trajectory, and get access to a better life.
oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. So that's the thing, that the change is there, that they're more, I think, open, to sending their children to school and for making sure that they follow through, like making sure that children actually study till 12th grade and not fall out, because many children at that time were studying till 5th grade, 6th grade, and then they were pulled out. I mean, I'm not saying that this still does not happen, it still
Yeah.
takes place, but there has been a change for sure.
Even in attitude or perspective,
Yes,
possibly to
yes,
see the,
yes,
something, Radhika,
absolutely.
we take a lot for granted, sort of in circles of privilege or urban centers, different communities. We take for granted, certainly as adults, that we'll have access to potentially advisors, mentors. As students, a lot of us had a favorite teacher. Do you feel that there are enough of those kind of adult figures for some of these people? I mean, it's a bit of a random question in that sense, but I feel like it's also because everyone is so what is very stark is that it's literally survival
Yeah,
for so many of the characters in your
they're
book.
all in survival mode. Yeah.
They're in survival mode. So it's not that they will have access to people. I mean, maybe Bhola is one of the few. Some of the teachers who also helped out.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have access to anyone. Actually, they don't have anyone to counsel them, to give them advice, which is quite unfortunate. And I also feel, at least, I mean, it's hand to mouth living, right? That they're battling their circumstances every day. They don't have the mind space to even think about anything else. But
Yeah,
but um, but yes, I mean, I think Bhola is someone who inspires them, and Bhola is doing a lot for his community. Like I said, I've written in the book as well. Like, he took three of his nieces and enrolled them in Chennai in a school, which is a big deal for a conservative community like the Domes, because girls girls education is sort of
yeah,
considered like, it's not considered mandatory at all. I mean, this is not only in Chandghat. It's sort of
yeah.
unfortunate
Across,
pan India,
yeah, yeah,
in many families and regions. So but the fact that he's able to convince his family, his brothers and sisters, to allow the girls to leave Banaras, and travel with him to Chennai and stay and study there. And I think that's remarkable. It's a huge step, and these girls are super intelligent. I mean, I'm in touch with them. I know how they're studying. They're really studying for their life. Like, they're
yeah.
putting everything in
Everything.
it. Yeah, and in fact, one of them told me, Didi, we've always grown up being told that getting married and having kids is so important, and we've been taught by our mothers how to cook and cut vegetables, all of that. And for the first time, we are finally thinking about ourselves. We've been brought up to believe we have to take care of others, to take care of families and our husbands in the future and our children. For the first time, we can actually think for ourselves what we want. um and they're saying that we get to play kabaddi and all of that. I mean, like, they're seeing a different world, right?
Yeah.
And the possibilities that life can offer them. Just that power of education and school, and you get to meet other people and interact with them. I think it's a huge change, and for them to just find their own identity and voice, I think.
That's huge. That's
Yeah.
huge. And like you said, for girls in this country, in any case, but specifically
Yeah.
when you're coming from a conservative community, but also this opportunity to have a childhood, because I do think from some of the work in the mental health space where we do sort of, storytelling around mental health, in the health collective, and we talk a lot about sort of trauma and foundational trauma, think those kind of things. And I'm just thinking about what these kids are seeing. Again, you're saying 5 to 6 year olds, and by 10 or 11 they're kind of like veterans. And substance abuse is one of the ways they get to cope, because I can't even imagine that for adults that's particularly healthy to have no vent. and,
Yeah.
and of course, this is not to knock a way of living or a way to earn a livelihood, but it's so stark, the contrast there, right? What you just said about these three nieces, getting a shot at childhood and then a better future,
Yeah.
versus probably collective trauma, I'm pretty sure, of what they would have had to go through otherwise. It's Radhika, I have to say, I mean, hats off to you. Thank you for documenting this in such a way. Again, it's beautifully told. I feel like the narrative itself is so gentle and generous, and it's not judgmental, it's not preachy. And of course, we can sit here and be like, oh my God, look at these lives they lead. But that's not the tone of the book at all. I just want to be clear for any listeners. It's actually very, very in depth detailing of this community. Let me ask you a bit, Radhika, about, you've told us a bit about the process. It took about 7 or 8 years. You had to go back before and after the
Yeah.
pandemic as well, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
there major changes because of the pandemic? I feel like you do write a little bit about that also in the book. Can you
Yeah.
share a bit?
Um, yeah, so there were, of course, changes. And since you brought up the pandemic, and I've written about this in the book, so the corpse burners, initially the scare of the pandemic. I mean, all of us retreated into our homes, and um, nobody wanted to be out there, and we were all very scared of COVID. And similarly, corpse burners, initially they had retreated into their homes and they didn't want to work. um, Unfortunately, they were pulled out of their homes by the managers, who are also domes, but I mean, they oversee the proper functionings of what happens at the cremation ground. And so they, because there were so many bodies piling up at Manikarnika Ghat, the corpse burners were forced to work. And so there was this huge scare, of course, which they experienced, their families experienced. And I remember Mohan telling me that uh, there were just bodies coming and coming, and people was, the corpse burners had to stack bodies on top of each other, and like sometimes light the pyres like that. And sometimes the corpse burners were being handed 2,000, 5,000 rupees by grieving family members to have their deceased loved ones cremated, because there were not many corpse burners there who were actually available. Mohan and a few others were, who they were actually, I think, doing the work, most of the work. And so, under normal circumstances, a corpse burner gets paid about 200 to 250 rupees for each body he cremates. During the pandemic, they were, because the cost of everything had skyrocketed, right? So, cost of samagri had increased, and crematory services, the price of everything had increased. And so Mohan and a couple of other corpse burners were managed to, I mean, that was the only silver lining, I think, that they managed to earn a lot more than they were usually earning. And thank God that they were still safe and nothing happened to them, because they were literally working um, in a place of death, right?
Yeah.
And disease. So, and they had no protective paraphernalia at that time when they were working. And they didn't, because there was so much of chaos and hysteria. And there were so many bodies, they had no time to wash their hands. They weren't wearing masks, of course. So it was just like complete, um, I think it was just a very, very unpleasant period for them, especially. um yeah, I mean it was just.
At a the risk to their lives, right? I mean, that's what you're also saying. The
Yeah.
families were in constant fear, right? That
Yes, yes.
that something
Yeah.
could happen. Gosh, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. We're gonna, wind down this podcast with a question to Radhika on a lighter note. Well, hopefully lighter, depending on your reading material. What are some of your influences? Who are you reading now? And do you want to share a little bit about what you're up to now after this, magnum opus? I really think this does merit magnum opus because it's incredible. Hats off to you again, and I'm so glad to see it getting all the accolades and awards that this book deserves. What are you up to now, and what are some of your influences and authors that you're reading?
I'm At the moment, I just finished reading Nilanjana Roy's The Black River, and my influences are, I think there's so many. There is Sonia Falero, of course. I really love and appreciate her writing. Catherine Boo, Chimamanda Adichie, David Gran. They are some of the writers I really admire. And I think I read a lot of their work to gain inspiration. And Achal Malhotra, of course, really love her writing and her work. So, I mean, there are many, many to name, actually.
That's a great list of recommendations. I think David Gran I've not read from that list, so I'm going
Oh,
to note
he's
that down.
phenomenal.
I think that's good.
He's I think he's a Pulitzer winner.
Yeah.
He's a journalist as well, so, and also an author. But his work is impeccable. I mean, the degree of detail and research that he goes into.
Oh, fantastic! And you've given
Huge yeah.
your readers and listeners several other wonderful authors there as well. What happens now for Radhika? It's 2024. You're going to take a bit of a breather. Are you working on something else already, or? What can you share?
Yeah, I've taken a breather, but I have a couple of ideas in my mind about what I want to do. I might dabble into fiction. Let's see. So, yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Brilliant. So hopefully we'll be back on another podcast sometime to talk about that. Radhika, thank you so much for taking the time out today. And thank you also for this incredible work that you have written documenting the lives of this community that so many of us didn't know anything about. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me over.